So as I said, hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Zoom folks as well as the folks joining us in person. Thank you for showing up in this space. However you're showing up, we really are happy you're here. My name is Chinyce Cole-Henry and I'm a student at UC Berkeley and a student fellow for the Disability Community Cultural Center, the DCC, which you are sitting in or zooming into right now. And I also have my co-sponsor Natalia, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi everybody, my name is Natalia. I'm with UCSA. I represent the students of all disabilities across all 9 UCs, including UCSF, UCLA. And yeah, I love representing you guys. I do more policy work, so it's nice to be able to actually be in the community and be connected with you guys. It's my favorite part, so thank you.
And then a little bit about me that I forgot to mention. Like I said, my name is Chinyce. I use any pronouns, and in terms of a visual description, I am a Black, 5'9", masculine presenting person. I'm wearing a Spider-Verse shirt and some slacks, as well as like a blue button down.
Yeah, for my description, I'm a slim, tan-skinned person. I have curly hair. I'm wearing 2 ponytails. Like type 4B, 4C hair. I'm wearing some wide leg jeans. You can barely see my shoes in these wide leg jeans, but I have some cool tennis shoes with basketball designs on them, and a gray cropped shirt with a wrapped detail, some gold bangles, and a cross necklace. And I'm feminine presenting.
Thank you for that. So you can feel free to go. Oh, second mic? I think I'm okay for now, thank you. I will start off by saying this is a disability-centered space, so we take access needs very seriously. Please feel free to stand, sit, fidget, and/or move as you need to be comfortable throughout the event. Captions are also available, as you can see here, and there's a QR code if you need captions. There's definitely one right above the food, and if you need help, you can also raise your hand, and we'll bring you the QR code so you can have the captions. It also should be linked in the Zoom chat. Because the event covers several hours, there may be people coming in and out as time permits. And feel free to, there's one panel, a break, and another. Feel free to take breaks as needed, as the panels will be recorded. It'll take a while for the recording to come out, but they will be recorded. But we ask that everyone be mindful and respectful of all of us as you leave, and if you leave, try not to be disruptive, and this includes on the Zoom as well. And we may ask you to leave if you are disruptive, be it in space or in the Zoom. Because we are all learning and challenging ourselves, we may be having difficult conversations, so please take care of yourself and know that unlearning can be a process, and we are here to support each other. We also have an art gallery down the hall, as we'll be talking more about, but it delves into a variety of topics. So if you would like any specific content warnings around the topics of the art, please feel free to see myself, or just feel free to come see me if you would like a content warning before viewing the art. The restrooms are behind me. It's down that hall. And through the door, there is a women's restroom and a all-gender restroom. We have a low-sensory room right over there. So if you would like to take a moment to be in a low-sensory space, just pop in and close the door. And I think there is a in-use sign as well that you can click. And all the furniture we have can move, so feel free to adjust it and let us know if you need any assistance in making things more comfortable and accessible to be with us. Earplugs and fidget tools are also available. You can check in with Rachel if you'd like any of those. The panelists for our first panel are all virtual, and they're right here. And yeah, our second panel guest will be in person with us. We will record the formal portions of the panel and turn off the recording for Q&A. This also means that if you are using a recording device, such as a note taker, we may manually turn it off for that portion of the panel, and we will run you a mic for Q&A, so if you want to ask during Q&A, just feel free to raise your hand. We have lots of food and giveaways, including a raffle prize for filling out the feedback form. So if you have seen the flyer, it is the black flyer with the purple fist on it, but they're littered around the room, and the QR code is the feedback form to scan. You could also just be like, hey, where's that form? I'd like to fill it out. And we will be choosing the raffle folks based on the folks who fill out the feedback form. So help yourself out. There will be more food at the end of our programming. We hope you stick around, eat together, and view the student art gallery as we round out today. We would like to also take a few minutes to recognize that the land currently known as Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huichin and the ancestral and unceded land of the Xochitl-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Milwaukee Ohlone tribe and other formal descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty, and we will work to hold the University of California, Berkeley more accountable to the needs of the American, Indian, and indigenous people. We also affirm that this acknowledgement is insufficient. It does not undo the harm that has been done and continues to be perpetuated now against indigenous people, their land, and water. Okay. I have a brief opening that I'm gonna give, and then we'll be able to get started with the panel. I practiced this on the bus, so it's going to be an approximation of what I hoped it would be. I see disability everywhere. I see disability everywhere, I see disability everywhere, and I see disability in just about everything. The way I used to chew paper to focus in class, and the way I get so worried about a paper, it makes me anxious and sick. And the way we are asked to live each day as if everything is okay, even when bombs are dropped on babies and people are abducted off the street. I see disability in Miles Morales as a body marked as different from being, as a body marked as different from all the other Spider-Man. Despite being a Spider-Man, he is held down and told that his very existence is wrong and an anomaly. And he simply says back, nah, I'ma do my own thing. I see disability in the way my daddy tells me, that I better wash those spoons right. Because he wants to pass them down to me. And it's not just that he wants to pass the fancy spoons down, but that there's a specific instruction in terms of how you wash the knives, how you dry them, how you place them. Everything in our kitchen is in order to a T, maybe almost to an obsessive degree. Regardless, it's a pleasure to be in the kitchen with my father to listen to you. To listen when he tells stories about being in the kitchen with his grandma, learning how to make 7-Up cake and sweet potato pie. When he walked up to speak after my great-grandmother died, everyone said, "Oh, George, what is he gonna say now?" And as he goes on and on listing out the recipe to the 7-Up cake, he lands in the small, subtle things that made it slightly different, that made it finally taste like great-grandma's. Everything's so slightly obsessive and undeniably hyperactive, but that's okay. See, I see disability when I'm told not to touch nothing when I go in this store because they say poverty is slavery and is there anything more disabling? But you see, I wasn't, and is there anything more disabling? But you see, I wasn't given no spirit of fear, and I wasn't raised to be no punk, and I've never been taught to discipline, and I've been taught to discipline of mind over matter, and the fact that I gotta love myself first and work twice as harder and as good just in case the way I show up, just in case my work is delegitimized because I am a person of color, because I am an other, because I am an other gender, other body, other brain, other body type, other hobbies, other ways of being in the world that I've been asked to hide. I was told to be hard because historically the cost of weakness was to die, or more accurately, to be killed either instantaneously or slowly. And yet I can't help but feel inside myself expanding ever so slightly, taking pleasure in softness and learning new ways to abide. Today we're gonna be talking about disability and Blackness, and as we, thank you. Yeah. I want to get to talking to our panelists. So the last thing is just today we're going to be talking about disability and Blackness. And if you're a little bit new to disability theory, I'd just like to tell you that we might reference different models of thinking about it. So we might reference the medical model, which is the way in which medical systems might call someone broken until fixed, regardless of their disability, regardless of their body or disability and whether it's doing them harm or not. We might talk about the social model of disability, which states basically that, for a disabled person, the only thing I have left to lose is my chains, is the best way I can describe the social model of disability. And that if society chose to not limit people and put them in a box, there would be an easier and more fluid way to live throughout life. And we might also talk about disability justice, which in many ways was birthed here in the Bay Area by POC disabled folks who felt that they needed a model of disability that pushed beyond compliance with a set of rules, but that moved in more inclusive ways. And I'm excited to talk about all that today with our panelists. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the panel. Okay, and then the last thing is thank you again for being here. I will introduce our panelists, and I will also note that the views expressed by our panelists do not reflect those of UC Berkeley or any of today's sponsors for the event. So the first panelist we have, I'm gonna pull out my notes again, excuse me. I'm gonna pull them out. The first panelist we have is Lene Voss, who is a cultural worker, as well as they work in grief work. I'm giving brief bios so you can introduce yourselves. We have Amira Doty, who is a scholar at UCLA and also a Berkeley alum, so shout out. We have Derek Coates, who is the head of, I'm blanking on it, the DAC here at UC Berkeley. And then we also have Dr. Izetta Autumn Mobley, who is I don't have my notes out right now, but they're also an educator in the East Coast, and they'll be going a little bit more into that. Okay, so let me pull up the questions. Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so the first question I have is, can you tell us a bit about your work and your relationship to disability/disability justice? And anyone can start. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute.
Good afternoon, Chinyce. You're doing an amazing job. Thank you so much for everything that you've done to organize us and to organize this panel. So as I think about disability justice in particular, I think about it as distinct from accessibility, although accessibility can be part of disability justice. So I tend to think about disability justice as understanding that disability is a norm rather than aberrant or unnormal, right, or outside of human experience. In fact, disability is core to human experience. I think about disability justice as being about making sure that people have the access and equity access that they need when they need it, that we also dispel ideas of stigma around disability, and that we undo and actively resist eugenics. And eugenics is this idea that there is a hierarchy of man. And I use that both in the sense of human man, but also sort of the larger philosophical idea through which eugenics is developed, has this idea that there's literally a hierarchy of people, and some people are at the top of the hierarchy and some people are not. And physical ability, mental ability, body, mind ideas are very much aligned with in this eugenic hierarchy that some bodies are better than others. And so I think disability justice requires us to be actively resistant to eugenics models that can be both medical, they can be hidden in ideas about wellness, they can be hidden in ideas about sanism, and they can be hidden in ideas that are closely related to race and racism.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. And then can I just jump back in and ask, could you also just tell us a little bit about yourself? I think that got lost when I was reading the question.
You did all good. It's good. So I am Izetta Autumn Mobley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a native Washingtonian, born, bred, and very proud. I say that because we are an occupied city, that people often forget that DC is an occupied city. And I think that's really critical at this moment when we're also thinking about anti-colonial practices that are related to eugenics. I do my work along sort of five intersections as a disability scholar, as a critical race theorist and scholar, as someone who studies gender, as someone who studies medical history, and certainly the history of slavery. And I'm the author of, co-author with Moya Bailey, Dr. Moya Bailey, of Toward a Black Feminist Disability Framework that really asks us to think about how disability and race are tied together and how that is specifically tied to gender.
Thank you so much. And I'd be happy to just pass it on to Amira to kind of, tell us a bit about who you are and how you're showing up into the space.
Hi, it is so lovely to be here. Can you hear me? Yes. Perfect. Hi, my name is Amira. I am a skinny, medium, dark-skinned woman. I have short, curly hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a blue striped shirt with a dark blue collar. I'm tuning in from sunny LA. I am LA born and raised, but I am a Berkeley alumni through and through. I currently attend UCLA Law. As some of you may know, I was an ASUC senator back in 2023 to 2024. The record on this, the jury on this is still out. Some say I was the very first Black disabled senator or openly disabled senator in ASUC history. I created a very short-lived party called Progressives at Cal, which was based around academic accessibility for low-income and disabled students. Most of the efforts that we did revolved around sensory safety, accessible infrastructure, and professional development for students with disabilities. We did a lot of good work. I also consulted for Assembly Bill number 2821, which was approved by the governor in late 2024, and that required California CSUs and community colleges to implement a disability access and compliance training program during onboarding for employees. And that was pretty significant. But what I've been most passionate about is anti-ICE organizing these days. I work mainly in immigration justice. So what I've been doing is mainly dispensas. So you wake up very early in the morning, you go to a rapid response network, and you pack up groceries, medication, toiletries, all of these daily necessities, a lot of menstrual products too, because that's been a huge concern lately. And you deliver them to people who can't leave their homes due to the occupation of ICE, to the ongoing brutal, violent, and often fatal occupation of ICE in Los Angeles. And I think this relates heavily to disability justice because a lot of these detainees are disabled and there's been deaths due to a lack of care, incredible violence during encounters, neglect in detention centers, denial of access to necessary medications, assistive devices, communication accommodations, unsafe releases. They're releasing people several miles away from their home, forcing them to walk back with no resources. They're calling me, hey, I'm in Century City. Where do you live? I live in Temecula. How did you get there? Right? So that's a very, very long way from home. And there's been a few deaths. I've seen them. I've seen what's happening due to ICE. And I think that makes this work of paramount importance to the disability community. I feel like every LA resident should be doing their part because, if you're a villager, you protect the village. But yeah, I'm very happy to be here and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for that. Thank you for all of that. I'm going to pass it on to Derek to just introduce yourself, how you're coming into the space, and your relationship to disability/disability justice.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Derek Coates. I've been with the university for 23 years now. I use the he series, and I'm African American, And I am wearing sunglasses because I'm blind. I've got these wonderful headphones because my world is all about sound. So like I said, I've been at the university for 23 years. This is like my 6th iteration of my job. When I started my career here, for most of my career, my connection to disability justice is about me listening to complaints by students alleging discrimination in classes that have disabilities on campus. So a student is supposed to get extended time on an exam. They don't get the extended time. They could go to their DSP specialist and ask for it to be resolved. But if that wasn't successful, they were able to come to me. And I was able to go and sort of talk with the instructor or the academic appointee and figure out how do we get this moving forward, get this situation unstuck. I did that for the first 6 years of my career, and then I did the same thing for staff. So I had a chance to also work with staff and understand the kind of accommodations and issues that they also encounter. My real touch with disability justice is, for example, student goes into the class, they have campus authorized accommodations on a letter of accommodation, and the professor looks at the letter and says, well, you don't look like you have a disability. Or the professor says, well, time is up. Everybody else has finished their exam. You're not going to do any better on it. I'll take the exam now. For staff, it's, well, you can't bring a dog to work at all as an accommodation. For staff, it is you haven't completed your job duties, your assignments. And ultimately, what this means was talking to different people who think that they've been discriminated against on the basis of their disability. They don't all know. Not everybody knows what that looks like. They just know that something didn't happen that was supposed to happen, and they feel wronged. So they could come to me, I would listen to the entire story, sort it out, and figure out, okay, is there something here that the university wants to be fixed? So I had the wonderful opportunity to talk to hundreds of students and staff and resolve discrimination complaints on the basis of disability with them. So I got to see not only the harassment, the reflected appraisals that are weaponized, but also just the denial of access and resources. So that's how I come to this space. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Ms. Lene Voss, you're here right on time. I don't know if you would like to give yourself an intro, but also if you're resetting up, then that's fine. It is no worries. I will move on to the next question and we'll be happy to come back. So the second question is, what are the perspectives on disability you witnessed within your family and community growing up? And furthermore, how, if at all, did media representation influence your perception of disability? And again, anyone can take this. I'll leave it open.
I'm happy to jump in. Chinyce, I really appreciated that you included this question because I think it's core to helping us unpack some of the ideas about disability that we may have been raised with or absorbed through community, but that we may not have taken time to unpack. So I really appreciate this question. And I think it's important to also think of this as a generational question, because prior to 1990, which is when the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, was signed and put into law, after a lot of effort and work and protest from disabled people who protested in buildings, who literally drug themselves up the Capitol steps and protest, that until then, most students did not have integrated classrooms. Which means that if you are maybe Gen X and older, you may not have been in an integrated school. So you literally may not have seen people with disabilities, right? And then also, if you are Gen X and above, the conversation about neurodivergence was very different. Even within the last 10 to 15 years, the conversation about neurodivergence has changed. So when I think about some of the ways that certain words were used when I was coming up about disability, while at the same time you were with people who were being mainstreamed, when I think about the number of people who are perhaps in baby boom generation, so unless they have a disability or a family member with a disability, may be very unfamiliar with this idea that disabled people are with us every day, right? So that's such an interesting question because it's generational, it's cultural. I think specifically for certain communities of color, there is disability that lives in plain sight, but that is not thought of as disability, right? And then that could be everything from a parent or a grandparent or a great aunt who has trouble with sugar, right? So we don't talk about necessarily or an amputation as a result of a diabetic episode, right? So the way that certain things are normalized and the way in which also there's this piece of stigma and people are constantly negotiating internalized ableism. I'd say internalized eugenics, right? That's really a form of internalized eugenics, and balancing different kinds of stigma. And also recognizing that disabled people have not all received the same rights or access at the same time. So Gallaudet, for instance, which is a premier university for deaf and hard of hearing people, was segregated. As a result, there is a mainstream American Sign Language and Black American Sign Language. Even thinking about access to schooling and medication, it's been very different. So even though you could have people share disabilities across race or across gender, their experience of that, the representation of that, might look very different.
Thank you for that. And could you clarify the classrooms? I feel like folks know, but just like integrated and non-integrated classrooms, could you define that for us?
Sure. So historically, prior to the ADA in 1990, it was lawful to have separate education or segregated education systems for those with disabilities and those who were not seen as disabled, whether that was a physical disability, whether or not it was an intellectual disability. So people would be essentially segregated by disability. And it was also not uncommon for people to be institutionalized. So if your body-mind alignment was seen as being too difficult or too far out of mainstream, then students would be institutionalized rather than granted full access to education with their peers. And what the ADA does, and something called the IDEA, and it's dependent on what state you are in, but it essentially allows access, equal access for disabled children to education.
Thank you for that. I'm going to pass it to Derek if you would like to jump in on this question.
So I come at this question being a person who, at 10 years old, they go around and they do tests at elementary schools. They check people's eyes, nose, etc. And they found spots on my retina and told my mom that I was going to be blind. And so the kind of vision that I had, the kind of blindness that I had was like looking through the diameter of a softball or a baseball. So everything else is not in your field of vision except for the diameter of that baseball. So I could pass as sighted. And I did most of my life until I got to college. And then once I got to college, my vision got so bad that I had to start using a cane. So when I think about how disability was represented when I was growing up, there wasn't limitation put on me like there is on many, many, many other people in terms of what I could do. For my dad, the best thing was to get to a Cal State and get to a university. But at the end of the day, as I moved through college, that's when I started to recognize, okay, now that I'm carrying this cane, how is my disability reflected back to me? Most of my life, it was my Blackness that was reflected back to me, not my disability. But when I pulled that cane out, I recognized that other people changed quite a bit. All of a sudden, they're not scared I might steal their purse and fly away. They still lock the doors, But nevertheless, the point being that I had to adjust to this new change in my identity as a result of now carrying this visible symbol of a white cane in terms of me being blind. And so hidden disability makes a big difference when it comes down to thinking about perceptions of disability in our culture, in our society, and how we think about people who have disabilities. Most of the time, we're encountering people who have the observable, the physical. But we have to be aware of the fact that in our community, we also have a great deal of discussion about people who have mental health disabilities.
Thank you. And then we can jump to Linnea.
Okay, let's give this a try. It worked. I had to force quit Zoom. It was intense, but I'm here. My name is Linnea Voss. Pronouns are she, her. I live in and I'm from Philadelphia, Occupy Lenape-Hogan. And I came to disability justice work through my own experiences of medical malpractice, medical misogyny, and medicalized fat phobia. I am now in my mid-40s realizing that being a quote-unquote smart kid who was reading at age 3 meant that my neurodivergence was not fully seen and acknowledged in school environments. And so I, not unlike a lot of other women and people assigned female at birth, am starting to realize that I needed some services as a kid that I did not get, because as long as I was smart and I had decent grades and didn't get into trouble at school, I was considered okay. So that's one thing that ties into my answer for question 2, the perspectives on disability that I witnessed within my family and larger community as a kid. I had an uncle on my mom's side who was most likely dyslexic. He did not receive services because he was just considered lazy and a bad student. He needed his eyes checked, but he did not have the language to explain what he needed to be able to see written words and numbers, et cetera, differently. He was a talented musician. He became a mechanic. He's worked in construction. He's done all these things, but now, as he's a man in his early to mid 60s, I see where his lack of support has made him susceptible to things that are not so great, especially with the misinformation and disinformation rampant on the internet right now. And that's one thing that I've learned about disability, invisible disability especially. There's always, oh, I didn't know there was something wrong with you. There's always this surprise response. As a kid, I had really bad asthma. But shout out to the EPA and the Clean Air Act, what was that, 1990, 1991? I did not need an inhaler to function anymore by the time I started middle school. But what I did not know as a kid that I am very acutely aware of as an adult is that my entire family, my mother, both my sisters, maternal grandparents, maternal uncles, cousins, all that, we all have some level of autoimmune issue, and it's not just pollen allergies. I didn't know allergies were a disability until I became an adult. I have severe food allergies. I shouldn't say severe, I have numerous food allergies, and plus I developed long COVID in 2020 after one COVID infection, and just, all of that. And it's shifted my understanding of disability was always something physical. And to echo what Dr. Mobley said, somebody's got problems with sugars, they have high blood pressure, their pressure is bad. But then we have someone who says their nerves are bad, and that could be anxiety, depression, a mood disorder, personality disorder. It could be complex PTSD, which is treated like a syndrome, but in my opinion, it's a brain injury. And we have things happening now with long COVID, with mast cell activation syndrome, POTS, COVID onset diabetes, COVID onset kidney disease, all these things. And I just see, similar to what you said in your opening, Chinyce, I see disability everywhere. I see it everywhere. I have a sensory need around my nails. They got to be done, or I am just out of my skin. you know, just the little things, but then the bigger things, like people who can't tolerate certain fragrances or can't tolerate fragrance at all. Just, we are surrounded by access needs, whether people understand themselves as disabled or not. And it's not as simple as that drama from the 90s, Life Goes On, where Chris Burke plays a character, Corky, and there was a whole campaign around not calling people the R word in the 90s. And we're back at people calling each other the R word because we have a larger social convention that permits that. So it's just, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but that's why we're here, right? That's why we're here. It's just everywhere. It is pervasive. And even right now, and somebody is not going to be on camera, or somebody is laying down listening to us, because that makes it easier for them to process the information. There's a sensory room that y'all have there at the center. And just even, you know, pre-cut vegetables and fruits in the grocery store. Those grabbers for people who have low or poor grip strength. So many things make our lives easier that are actually disability accommodations. And that's just really kind of always at the forefront of my mind.
Thank you so much for being able to jump back on and for sharing. Let's go ahead and jump to Amira.
So I'm going to bring my very personal Gen Z outlook on it, as I'm only 22. So I did not live through a lot of like disability movements, but when I was a kid, I thought that disability, particularly neurodivergence, was like a white phenomenon. Since I was like 3 years old, I heavily exhibited all the markers for autism. But I wasn't diagnosed in school because my administrators did not see me as autistic. They saw me as the angry Black girl, unsmiling, unfriendly, uppity, suspiciously quiet, maybe adultified a bit, quite mature for my age. And as a result, I didn't get accommodations. I didn't get much academic attention, good or bad. And I did fine in school, like Lene, and I did not get in trouble, but I had this vague sensation of otherness. And at the home and within the community, there was this sort of moral failure affixed to my autism. A lot of it had to do with viewing neurodivergence as a sort of test of faith, a religious outlook that is very prominent within especially Black Southern circles. So this idea that there was this idea within my family and my community that an autistic kid was actually just out of control because their parents coddled them or didn't discipline them enough or didn't instill good Christian values in them or let them get away with whatever. And that this kind of behavior, the behavior we now know is just being autistic and undiagnosed, was actually a product of being white and having the privilege to act out. So as a result, when I had really bad sensory issues as a kid, especially with clothing. I would refuse to wear all variety of clothing. Sometimes I would go nonverbal. Sometimes I would have these sort of social breakdowns. And I wasn't displaying symptoms of autism to my family. I was being a brat, mouthy and undisciplined. I was acting like one of them rich Valley white kids. And this kind of racially essentialist belief was really damaging as I grew up. And it's caused me to learn that there is a lot of cultural conservatism within Black families where being Black and disabled or Black and queer or Black and something unconventional somehow takes away from your Blackness. And it's something that I feel like we need to dismantle. As for media representation, the only Black person with a disability that I ever had growing up was Misty Knight from Marvel Comics. She's this character, this superhero who has like a high-tech bionic arm. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that she was a cop. And yeah, And a lot of why she was so accepted within the Marvel canon had to do because she still upheld the system of racial domination. She still upheld everything that has to do with being a cop in America. And that's how she got away with being a Black and disabled character and getting all of these appearances, because at the end of the day, she still upheld this conservative fundamental belief. And then one more thing, as for Black history, when I was a kid, I read my history books and I didn't realize anything about Black people with disabilities. They were just completely invisible. I knew about Harriet Tubman. I didn't know that she had epilepsy and narcolepsy. I knew about Sojourner Truth. I didn't know that she had to hide her disability that stemmed from her abuse because she wanted to project an image of strength and she was scared of being stigmatized. I knew about the Black Panthers, but I sure as hell didn't know about Dennis Billups or Brad Lomax or the 504 sit-in, which happened in SF not too far from where you're all at, that led to the prohibition of disability discrimination in federally funded programs. And that sit-in, in fact, was the longest occupation of any federal building in US history. So there we have that invisibilizing of disabled bodies layered atop the invisibilizing of Black bodies. And that is something that I see everywhere. Disability is something I see everywhere, but I also see being invisible everywhere, if that makes sense. And it's something that I have to constantly tarry with. And yeah.
No, that makes so much sense. I feel like I want to recap, but I feel like everything's been really dense. So I'm like, I'm not even going to try. I'm going to keep pushing into the next question, which is just, how do you show up for yourself as a Black disabled person or, as a Black disabled person? In what ways, in terms of within academic spaces or workplaces, do you work to also have those needs met? And we'll continue to do the raise hand or unmute to pick the first person. And we'll go to Myra.
Oh, I think Lene had her hand up first.
Oh, okay. I can't see it on my end, but yeah, Lene can go.
Okay, so, how do I show up for myself as a Black disabled person? First, I take naps. Like, I'm not gonna pretend like rest is not essential to how I handle my life. And so with that at the center, it's put me in a position where I cannot work a full-time in-person job. I'm a grief and death doula, a writer and organizer. I've been a nanny. I've been a housekeeper. I've been a part-time front desk, receptionist. I've done all these things, but a lot of them are because I could not work a full-time job in person. I also have bipolar disorder, and I didn't have a diagnosis until I was 35 going on 36, so 10 years ago. And at the time, I just knew that if I had meds, I'd be able to function differently. Maybe not better, but with less stress in my life, less anxiety. And I've disclosed to former employers before about mental health crises or mental health issues, and I'm having physical health issues. I'm very vocal about it because that is part of where I am. It's part of how I got here. And whether they understand it or not, my chronic illness and or my disabilities are part of why they want me around as a worker, even if they don't see it that way. My ability to streamline certain processes might be because I don't have the patience. Or, the mood I would set at my old front desk job was because I hate fluorescent overhead lighting. So I had mellow lamps and mellow lighting and mellow music at the front desk, those kinds of things. And I also just think that's an outgrowth of, yet again, people not knowing it. folks that are disabled out here and that we are constantly in community with and in conversation with disabled people.
Thank you so much. Jumping to Amira.
In college, especially like being a student, you kind of have to just fight like hell, and it sucks. There's this quote by Toni Morrison. It was in this interview right after she won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And she says, "I stood at the border, claimed it as central, and let the rest of the world move over to where I was." And that's something that I have to carry with me. Unfortunately, it's not a choice. And that's something, again, that is difficult to grapple with. The fact that you just don't accept a peripheral status if you want to really academically thrive. Our lives as disabled people and the lives of people like us, we are the center of value. We are sites of power and resistance and incredible tenacity. And we deserve to adopt that conviction, that rootedness, and stick to it and lean on those around us. There is never any shame in asking for accommodations. I know a lot of you already know this, but I just want to reinforce it because it is something that is drilled in us since we stepped foot onto campus, especially at UC Berkeley. I was part of the Disabled Students Program at Berkeley. I'm now part of the Center for Accessible Education at UCLA. I had to get accommodations as early as possible, like June, in the summer before I entered Berkeley. And I had to send up follow-up emails, had to sludge through so much paperwork. But that's what you do. You hold on to your caretakers and your therapists and your friends and your family and community so you don't drown in all that bureaucracy. And that's really, really hard. Everyone who has been through the accommodation process deserves a round of applause because it sucks. But that's what community is for. And if there's anything I know, it's that we lean on each other. And another thing is, this is an ongoing project, I'll admit, but trying to liberate myself from other people's judgment, from trying to like mind read and think of how other people are judging me and placing me as the other. So I bring the STEM toy into that classroom. I wear my headphones in office hours. Sometimes I just kind of leave. I'm like, I'm overstimulated. I need to step outside, and I just sit outside and kind of just stare blankly into nowhere. And that's where I find my peace. And it's scary to do any of those things, to like make yourself out to be disabled because you're already Black, and it feels like, oh, now we're adding another target onto our backs, another vector for discrimination. But all we could hope to do is create a world where it's not scary, because it shouldn't be. And every little accommodation that we take, everything that we do is an act of resistance. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to echo that. Just, you know, folks say like the existing is resistance in the bodies that we live in and in the institution that we're currently under. So I want to echo that. I want to ask if any other panelists want to jump in on this question before we move on to the next question.
Yeah, I'll talk. How do I show up as a person with a Black person with a disability? I say boldly. You know, my blindness and my Blackness is available in public to everybody. I can't hide. It's not invisible. When I got my cane and I got to Cal, the first thing I did was I needed a travel roll or ball. So most of the time when you see a cane, it's got a slender tip. I wanted a ball on the end of it so it won't get stuck in the sidewalk, but also I wanted it to be the size of a crystal ball so everybody could see me coming. Why? Because I'll be walking down the street and people won't be paying attention and noticing that the cane is there. And I'm thinking I'm walking into them making a mistake, and it's actually them making a mistake. So when it comes down to how I represent myself as a Black blind man, I do have to say boldly, I'm diligently aware of how people can inflict social harm. You know, having heard so many stories from students about how people act that are ableist, I'm good with that. I understand that you can't let everybody define you. They might think that they can, but you have to fight against that. I show up at work by doing my job. I do my job with accommodations. That means that I go and I learn about my disability. There's a question about what do you do if you're adventitiously disabled later. At work, I go and I learn about my disability. How does it impact my ability to do the essential functions of my job? Where do I need to go to do research to find out, well, what kind of accommodations can I ask for in the workplace that'll help me do what I need to do? I can do the job, all right? It's just a matter of whether I can get the accommodations that enable me to do so. One of the things I'll do is I did when I lost my vision in 2010 was go to the Job Accommodations Network and read about, I could find my disability and read about everything that the federal government has to say about accommodations for people with this particular disability. And lastly, how do I show up? Is I participate in that interactive process. This is my employment. It's real. It's not just a class. And so when it comes down to what accommodations are going to help me do what I need to do, that's what I'm looking for. That's the kind of conversation that I'm wanting to have. And again, it goes back to doing your research. Go out and read about, okay, what is this interactive process meeting supposed to be about if I'm going to be requesting accommodations? What are the expectations of me? So part of it is mastering the process of being able to enable yourself to be the most successful by requesting the accommodations. Another part of it is just allowing yourself the freedom and the compassion to grow. Recognizing that there's a whole lot of people out there that might be mean. And guess what? There's another one that's coming along in 5 minutes. You can just wait and they'll show up. But part of it is understanding, what is the motivation for these things, these barriers that seek to prevent me from being academically successful or from being successful at work. Identifying those and figuring out what kind of ways can we surmount those barriers and go around them. So part of it is just really educating yourself on what you need to do in order to be gainfully employed or be successful in your classes, despite the ableism that exists.
Thank you, Dr. Coates. I really appreciate that, especially when you started out saying, I do it boldly. Deeply appreciative of that. I also, just from a historical point of view, want to note that there's this additional complication, nuance, vector of oppression in that Blackness itself, right, is a disability. So that a lot of the ideas that we're framing, again, I mentioned that hierarchy of humanness, that hierarchy of being, saw disability as a lack, saw Blackness as a lack of whiteness, and so therefore disabled. And that part of some of the ideas about Blackness in and of itself is that Blackness is a less human experience. It is a less human experience. That part of that can entail like ideas about intelligence, ideas about pain tolerance, ideas about, do you have, if you've ever run track, did you have a fast tick or a slow tick? All of a sudden, all the Black people are sprinters, right? No, right. So these different kinds of things where Blackness is literally thought of a disability, and that complicates this even asking for accommodation or moving through the world, because it also does this thing where Black people are not supposed to ask for help. Black people are not supposed to make certain kinds of demands. Black people are not supposed to take up certain kinds of space that a disability accommodation may demand. And it can be amazing how people will discriminate around race in very subtle ways, and then really try to negotiate around disability. Something of the race, culture, and disability together really throws people for a loop, and you get a series of hostile behaviors, confused behaviors, behaviors where people can't decide what it is they're going to discriminate against you for, but they just know something ain't right, they don't like it. And I think that can be a very difficult nuance to
develop. So one of the things I think is important is, yes, advocate. Yes, absolutely ask for the accommodations that you are entitled to. And sometimes you just have to ignore other people. Sometimes you have to ignore what people's behavior as a result of, and sometimes you're just collecting data, because it can be so telling about how someone behaves when you ask for or need an accommodation, right? What is the response to that? Sometimes I think it's very important, and it's a way to manage our own energy, is to use that as data and information, and collect that data and information so that we're not trying to expend tons of energy trying to get people to help us. Sometimes, I once had a mentor say to me, sometimes you just have to flip the table over once so that they understand that that is a potential and that you know what your rights are. And it took me a very, 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 very long time to understand that. But it doesn't mean that you have to be unwieldy, although sometimes it may require it, right? But it does mean that sometimes you just need to make it very clear that you know what your rights are and you will not be treated in certain ways. And sometimes that can be giving people, somebody says something wild and you say, excuse me, and you let the discomfort hang, right? Sometimes it is I can't imagine what you could possibly mean by that. Maybe you could help me understand, right? These are also forms of putting in boundaries and also being a reflecting window to people's behaviors so that you don't have to absorb it all.
Thank you, thank you. Let's jump to Lene. I see your hand up. We can't hear you.
Okay. So there we go. Just really quickly, I guess I don't want to call it the cherry on top because this is more than a sundae, right? This is like 31 flavors at least of things. But I want to add really quickly that in terms of self-advocacy, do not date somebody who is overtly and openly ableist to you. Do not befriend people who are openly and overtly ableist to you. I just ended a relationship with someone who just one day was like, I don't want a mask on public transit anymore. You can't make me. I have long COVID. I cannot take this more seriously than I do. I don't, just short of never leaving the house again, right? We have to be in the world, and we get to be in the world the way we need to be in the world, as long as it is not causing anyone else any harm or distress. Do not date people who think that you should be happy that they gave you any attention or time because of your disability, your chronic illness, your whatever flavor of neurospice you have. There is someone who loves that more than anything. And there is someone who will be your friend, your best friend, your closest friend. Do not let these people who treat your existence trivially be close to you. That is a guaranteed way to increase your stress and make you sicker if you deal with chronic illness. It is a guaranteed way to be isolated and alone. And most importantly, the one accommodation that I don't think we really gets, I don't think it gets attention medically, is our social needs. Your social needs are an accommodation. You know, shout out to the late Stacey Park, Alice Wong, and everyone else we've lost, especially in the last 6 years since COVID. Stacey might have been the first person I knew to die of COVID, right? And I had known her online for at least a decade at that point. That was my girl, you know? And it was rough to lose her and to see people ignore or not care or say they want all the commemorative items to honor her life, but they don't wear masks when they go into medical settings. They don't get tested regularly for anything. You know, tell people that they have to absolutely match their actions to what they say is important to them if you are important to them. Do not let people who don't respect your disability be close to you if you can help it. That might be complicated. It may be family and you may need them. It may be a partner and you may need them. It may be your job that you really need because you don't know where else you're going to be able to even have the schedule you have. I understand completely. But if you have the option to walk away or to limit that person or that institution's access to you for your own quality of life, you must. You absolutely must. You will not survive if you don't.
Thank you so much for bringing it home and just centering protecting your peace as it relates to this whole conversation. I feel like, centering protecting your peace. As we're getting close to end time, we might go just a tad over and push the second panel a couple minutes later. But I did want to bring in a question that was put in in the RSVP, which was, many students are navigating multiple responsibilities alongside their studies. And if you had recommendations, what would you tell universities in terms of how to better support students who are managing ADHD, other neurodivergent experiences, balancing parenthood, caregiving for aging parents, and in general, being overwhelmed with coming to school or grad school? Maybe we can, I'll leave it open.
I was going to say, I was really hoping Dr. Coates would start us off because of your experience, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So I would tell the university and remind everybody at the university that these students weren't admitted because they have disabilities. They were admitted because they competed against their peers successfully. And now the university believes that the probability of them being academically successful is high enough for them to invest in this particular student. What else I would tell the university is adequately fund those units that provide services. The Disabled Students Program, or whatever the program is named at your college or university, is the first contact for most students that are entering into the university. And having an application process that is easy is huge. Making sure that they're staffed appropriately is huge. Having people who have the experience and expertise to understand how to explain the accommodation process to a student. You know, the assumption is that students go into college and they just know, okay, I'm blind, I know what I'm supposed to do. They forget that people can become disabled in a heartbeat. Remind academic appointees and everybody else that they have an obligation to not discriminate against people with disabilities, and give them the information and the tools that they need to be successful. And that goes whether it's physically accessing the campus because the automatic door opener is closed, you can't get to the class, or whether it's going into the dining facility, as I did with my dog being blind, and saying, okay, dining facility, restaurant people, do you know how to act when I come in there and I want to come and eat? But ultimately, it's the university has units available that are there to sort of help facilitate people being successful. But part of it is making sure that there's integrity in the process. And again, making sure that there's funding available that allows people to do what they need to do so that they can impart that information. You know, every student that graduates with a disability from a college or university, in my mind, is a superstar, right? Because you don't really understand and know all of the struggles and problems and challenges that they had to go to get that diploma. And that's on top of just being an ordinary college student. So when it comes down to what I would tell the university, I would tell them, you know, when you it's just like with staff, when you hired these people, you expected they were going to contribute to your unit, to your business, to your ability to do the job that's mandated by the university. They didn't say, okay, I'm going to hire them because they have a disability. So remember that people are qualified, and they're here and they're qualified, and they deserve respect, and they deserve to get the services and the access they need to be productive.
Thank you so much, Derek. Would anyone like to contribute, or should we go to our, okay, thank you.
One of the greatest parts of being in the ASUC was getting to sit down in front of other students and just talk about all of the accessibility issues they were facing, all the needs that were met and unmet, the relationships with specific professors. And when you spend an entire academic year doing that, patterns start to emerge. And that's why a lot of the bills that we started with were around sensory safety. Because a lot of Berkeley students, as you know, if you're a student at Berkeley, some of the lecture halls are incredibly intense. The planning of them, the floor plan, the overhead lights, the constant whirring of the projector, the brightness of the screen, and the fact that sometimes if you were like a wheelchair user, there was like only one or two designated DSP seats. So there were like three wheelchair users in a class. One of them was just kind of floating around with no clear direction on where to sit. And all of these little things that often go unnoticed by most students and by administration can compound into severely impeding a neurodivergent student's executive functioning and ability to complete their coursework. Because how are you going to focus in a class if you are overstimulated? And so, of course, we did a lot with like scent control. We helped pioneer the bill that got the unscented soap in the bathrooms. That was a logistical nightmare, but it happened. Yay.
Yeah.
And also, creating areas in classrooms that were cordoned off, that were quieter, that didn't have those like lights directly above you, that were far away from the projectors where students could sit. Simple things like that. Having visual schedules for students, because sometimes like with Canvas, you have like the reminders and it's like very hard for certain students to navigate. So to just have one clear checklist that the GSIs could make for students. Like a lot of, like there is some students who wanted to have like a designated safe person that they could come to class with them, whether that be a non-student or like a caregiver or a friend or like another student who was also in the class that they just wanted to sit next to help them out, making sure that the professors were aware of that. There's a lot of little tweaks that can be made, and I think it just starts with having conversations with students because their needs are so incredibly diverse that it just starts with the conversations. And that's why I love DSP, but I do believe that DSP needs more resources, or at least that was my experience when I was an undergrad.
Yeah, I'm really hearing listening to students as a major thing you're talking about. But let's go ahead and jump to Lene.
Wow. So from my own experience, because I was I don't want to call it late, but I lived a lot of life before I got any of my diagnoses. And what I know to be certain about myself is that I was mentally ill in college. I dropped out second semester of my sophomore year. I actually flunked out on purpose because nobody believed me when I said I needed to take a serious break. Paid off my student loans 20 years ago and never went back, not because I didn't like to learn or did not like the school environment, but because I couldn't see a way to get what I needed because I didn't know what I needed. And so anyone who is newly recognizing a disability in themselves or their community, whether it's something you realize at work, whether in the case of my family, my nephew was just diagnosed with autism in November, and now the whole family is contextualizing certain things differently. Whatever your entry point to understanding disability is, forgive yourself for not knowing sooner. Because internalized shame, internalized ableism cannot thrive if you forgive yourself. Because you may not think of it as something to forgive yourself for, but a lot of times we are like, oh man, I never knew. What could I have done if things were different? And that is, for those of us who have had a good amount of therapy or are in the mental health space, that's a cognitive distortion called hindsight bias. You're telling yourself that if you'd gotten a diagnosis sooner, nothing would be wrong and your life would be perfect. that is patently false. There's no such thing as a perfect life. There is such a thing as an adequately supported experience throughout life. And that may not be all the time. So the most important thing about shedding that shame and examining and then dismantling that internalized ableism, in my opinion and my experience, has been self-forgiveness. I thrive differently now because I have what I need. And if I decide to go back to undergrad, grad school, PhD program, whatever have you, I know what I need. I know what to ask for. I know I'm going to need a proper ADHD assessment. I know I'm going to need an autism screening. I know I'm going to need, certain things from, I have a hearing delay. I know I can't be in certain rooms for too long because of the overhead lighting, because of that impact on my long COVID, right? And then just on a very basic note, no matter where we are in the world, if you are not sure about disclosing a diagnosis, you're not wrong or bad for needing to wait or not being sure who you can talk to. In the workplace, you're supposed to be able to go to HR about certain things. I worked in HR and city government for the city of Philadelphia for 5 years. I'm gonna tell you right now, those people are not your friends. I have some much more colorful language to use, but this is a professional space. But those people are not your friends. And you must remember that no matter how friendly they are, their job is to protect the workplace and minimize the liability on the workplace. If they can hang you out to dry, they will. That also includes if you are a caretaker. I have a friend who worked for the city of Philadelphia for about 30 years, and she was on FMLA. She had done everything she was supposed to do and was terminated illegally from her job. Still has not been able to get her job back. Her husband has cancer, and he's in a rehab facility. Like, all of these things are happening because, and I was thinking about this earlier, people think of accommodations as perks because they personally do not have the accommodation, but they are placing a level of envy, but also envy based on misunderstanding. Well, how come they get to wear headphones all the time? Because they might punch you in the face if they're overstimulated. I don't think that's a perk. I think that's safety. You know what I mean? And a lot of people just, and I know that this is a larger part of settler capitalism, settler colonialism, ableism, misogynoir, anti-Blackness. If you have something different from what I have so you can live your life, I'm immediately supposed to question why you deserve it or why you have it, because I am told that my needs are in competition with your needs when the people who are telling us to compete against one another have more than they could ever use. So we, as individuals and as a collective, in my opinion, have a serious responsibility to interrogate the small questions too. As part of my personal abolitionist practice, I want to get to a place where we don't need prisons to take care of to handle people who do harm. But before we get to that, why am I questioning somebody's accommodation for their disability? Why would I question that? Why don't I find my own? Why don't I see if I need some? We're told to focus on the other person, and by othering them, we make them our enemy. When we make them our enemy, it's easier to dispose of them. We see it every day. The trans identity bill in Kansas, the way that ICE is snatching people up and imprisoning them and killing them, the way the police are allowed to imprison people and kill them. It's everywhere. It's all part of the afterlife of slavery. But I feel like that's another panel conversation for another time. Dr. Mobley, we gonna talk. It's just one of those things where, like, once you see it, it's very difficult to unsee it. And I want to encourage everybody here who's newer to understanding disability and chronic illness, whether it's their own or somebody else's. The policing of others starts here. We are taught to police one another from the time we are very small children. And yes, the squirrel is not a bird, correct. The circle is not a square. The triangle is not a rectangle. Absolutely. But at some point, there's a switch that flips, and we're told that the other is bad and wrong. And when otherness is made into evil in some construct, you are almost guaranteed to be sinister and menacing and harmful to people who are different from you. So I say all that to say, ask yourself the smaller questions first, forgive yourself for what you did not know. You did not come here fully formed, knowing everything. No one ever is. You have an opportunity to learn every day until your last day on earth. And most importantly, just remember that accommodations are about success and care. And you cannot get that from anywhere other than other people. I have a whole thing about artificial intelligence, but ChatGPT cannot do for you what you're receiving in this space under any circumstances. It could summarize the notes, but it's never going to catch the nuance. It doesn't move its hands when it talks, right? It doesn't have jokes. It's not human. We need each other if we're going to live in the world that we live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I want to jump in briefly because I feel like I sent the panelists the questions in advance, so they do have the final question, which is about specifically if you're newly disabled, how do you navigate shame, internalized ableism, and what can you do for yourself? So I want to let the audience know that that's what we're talking about right now as we wrap up. Okay, feel free to go.
I just wanted to say, Lene, you hit everything. I think one of the things I think about as an educator is the vital importance of making sure that my classroom setting or any education setting in which I am hosting is fundamentally equitable and accessible. And that is regardless of whether or not I know if someone has a visible or disability or otherwise, that I set the stage for accessibility from the jump as a way to say that disability is part of us every day. It's what makes us human. And also, many of the things that people think about as accessible just make the space better anyway, right? So really thinking about, as an educator, I feel like I have a true and deep responsibility to create an accessible and equitable space and a space of disability justice, because so many disabled people have been calculatedly driven away from education and from access. So I did want to think that. And I think the last 6 years has been very interesting because I think prior to COVID, I think I was seeing a lot of ways in which many different spaces were adapting to accessibility. And then COVID hit, and there's a real cognitive dissonance happening for people around what it means to provide accessible space when you're thinking about an airborne neurovascular disease. And and that has really been this moment of decisiveness where it's very hard for people to, there's a real cognitive dissonance, there's a real cognitive hiccuping where we're not able to understand that masking is in fact, that is disability justice, that is disability access. And if you are not masking in public spaces, you're telling disabled people or immunocompromised people that there is no space for them and that they do not belong and they don't have a right to be there. And you may also be contributing to people's early death. But it's really hard for us to talk about these things, right? And for people not to feel guilt about that, but to really educate themselves. So I think COVID, which is a mass disabling event, really has a moment to either push us forward to disability justice and access justice, or to delay us because of the hard truths that it might force us to really look at. And I appreciate, especially Lene, talking about what I'm working on a piece now, talking about access competition and accessibility competition and accessibility laundering, whereby because we've created a lived and built environment that is so hostile to human beings, whether that is hostile architecture because you don't want unhoused people to lay on a bench, or only having steps in certain locations so that then disabled people who need accessibility accommodations are seen as the competition. Oh, the train has been built without strollers in mind, so now I'm in competition with someone who needs strollers. So like the disabled person who needs a wheelchair or an accommodation or a mobility device becomes the competition. And that's not an accident. That's a series of logics about which bodies matter, when, where, and why. So just thinking about that piece that Linnea, that you said about asking the small questions, I think is so critical, because in my experience, people often enact ableism in some of the smallest ways and are not even able to see it for themselves. So also keep in mind that people are also even beginning to learn what ableism is. And that is hard to witness and experience, right? So that's all.
Thank you so much. Gonna jump to Amira and just giving a time check, folks. So we should wrap up in like 5-ish minutes, but we are gonna take a question from the chat as well after this. Yeah, feel free to take it away, Amira.
Okay, so back to like the last question about trauma-informed practices for unlearning shame when you recognize your disability. To take a very introspective approach, I think there's a lot of language like coded with moral failure, the self. I should not need help. I should be adaptable. I should. That word is something that just floats around in our consciousness a lot, especially for us students. And when you find yourself having that mode of thinking where I should not need help, you recognize that as an external standard that is thrust upon you, not as some sort of personal failure. You say that society doesn't want me to need help with this, but society also elected Trump. So what do they know? And like rugged individualism, rugged independence is a fantasy. It's an ableist, patriarchal, racist, sexist, all the isms way of viewing how we interact with each other and how we interact with society. Relying on others and allowing them to rely on you is a healthy and a normal human experience. Your accommodations aren't a special favor or an exception. It is an access need. It is a universal part of just being, of existing. And although like it is okay to feel shame, it is okay to feel whatever you feel. You should not shame yourself for feeling shame, because then there's layers to this and it builds up and it compounds into the spiral. And I know that personally. Internalized ableism is pervasive. It's insidious. It kind of has a way of creeping up on you even when you think it isn't. So what you should do, in my opinion, is to identify the rule that you're living by and recognize it as something that is societal. This is like kind of a therapy term, but there's something called radical acceptance. And it's the idea of accepting your reality without any judgment, accepting it as this observation. I am autistic. There's nothing attached to that. There's no like, oh, I am bad in social situations, or I am too hyperactive, or I'm too much, or I'm too little. I'm just autistic. And if I just radically accept who I am, which is one of the hardest things you could possibly do, by the way, even in like a therapy context, this is something that takes months, if not years, if not a lifetime of constant introspection. You break this cycle of shame and you can move forward towards adaptation, which is in itself a form of advocacy, rather than trying to fix something that does not need to be fixed. I also really like the idea of crip time. This is something that we used to talk about a lot in the Disabled Students Commission, the redefinition of productivity. Rest is radical. It's an act of repair. Rest is also advocacy. And allowing yourself to move at your own pace without feeling guilty for needing breaks is essential to embracing and validating yourself and to validating your lived experience. And again, one more thing, a lot of people with disabilities have fluctuating symptoms. This is something that was brought up to me in the ASUC, where sometimes students were like, why did you need a cane this day, but now you're walking fine? Why were you in the wheelchair, but you just got up and walked to the bathroom? How did that happen? And it is not my job to educate these people, but it also gave me the sense of shame. Like I was using this, maybe I didn't really need these assistive devices. Maybe I was faking it. Maybe there's something on my end that's wrong. And you have to understand that most people are not educated. They aren't, they don't know. And when you understand yourself, you kind of free yourself from their way of thinking. When you understand disability justice, when you engage regularly with disability justice, you kind of step towards self-acceptance. So yeah, that's what I think. But everyone else said it so much better than I could. I am among giants, and I am well aware of that.
Most definitely among giants. Thank you so much for that. I think for time we should jump to the audience question, and Rachel's going to read it out for us.
Thank you so much. The question is, what are the most common interpersonal challenges you encounter as a person with disability in professional and academic spaces?
That is a big one.
Let me know if you want me to repeat it.
I would say the biggest challenges are ignorance, and then just people who are unwilling to see an accommodation as being something other than something that's unfair to them, and that's been reflected earlier. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that.
I think people being in denial about their own internalized ableism, and then people become targets, right? If someone can't deal with their own internalized ableism, then particularly a person of color with a disability becomes an excellent target for people to work out what they have not settled on within themselves. And that also makes me think a great deal about disclosure politics. So I think that there's this idea that when you are disabled, you lose any kind of access or right to privacy. And I think people misunderstand, like they think an accommodation is a perk. To Lene's point, it's not. Usually what people have had to do to get an accommodation is to bare their soul, their entire medical history, a series of intrusive questions. And I think people do not understand the politics of disclosure. And I think that there is often deep curiosity that people are not able to discipline within themselves, right? They expect for the disabled person to do the educating versus saying like, I just realized I don't know a lot about disability and I need to go learn about it. So I think there's a disclosure of politics that even though people will mimic certain language about anti-ableism and language that has become very popular, that like there are tells and what people do in terms of the interpersonal reflection that they haven't had around disability. And so it's so deeply important for you to be grounded, because people will enact their insecurity or their lack of knowledge or their ignorance interpersonally, and that can be very, very dangerous if you're not secure for yourself, right? Like use the posture of learning, but also accept the wisdom of intuition if something feels like, I don't know why that didn't feel right, but that did not feel right to me. So I think definitely interpersonal pieces, people do not always understand their own ableism or their own internalized ableism and may be too ashamed to even admit it or to ask questions or to educate themselves. But that doesn't always mean that the disabled person has to do that labor.
Thank you so much,
Awesome.
passing it
That
on.
was awesome. I just want to add, it can be complicated if you are a Black person, especially a Black woman or feminine person who's worked in an office with another Black person, whether or not they're in your age group, but especially if they're a little older, there is the assumption that, and there's, you know, the ableism of ageism and childism that comes into play. They feel that whatever's quote unquote wrong with you is not that big of a deal. So they will ask a million questions. Probably, as Dr. Mobley said, because of their own stuff that has not been dealt with or seen. And so that's at the forefront of my mind when I answer the question, the most common interpersonal challenges that I encounter. And again, because I've stepped away from traditional workspaces, I haven't dealt with it very much. But my last office job, I had a outpatient procedure to remove fibroid tumors from my uterus in 2018. And for about 6 months thereafter, I kept going to the ER. I kept having to go back to the doctor. Nobody could figure out what was wrong. There was imaging, there were ultrasounds, all these things that were very painful. And it wasn't until I switched my doctor twice, cursed the second doctor out, and on my way out of the office, made an appointment with a third doctor. It wasn't until that third doctor, who I chose, that I figured out what was going on. And this entire time, my part-time job, at a psychotherapy clinic, might I add, that was supposed to be trans and queer affirming, I'm queer. That was supposed to be like, oh, we want to develop more patient outreach to Black people, et cetera, because that was the cool thing to do in 2018. They told me that my illness was costing them money and I needed to figure out what I was going to do about the fact that I cost them more money than they paid me. And I mean, I've had my experiences with white queers before. That's another conversation for another time. But to not have an answer from the person who was supposed to be the authority on my health, because that doctor was fat phobic and believed that Black people have a higher pain tolerance, was very challenging. And as Dr. Mobley said, sometimes they want you to bare your soul. They want to see your x-rays. They want to see your post-op report. They want to see your discharge papers. They want to see everything. And they still may not believe you. Because if you are upright, then you must be okay. And that is part of the legacy of Black people in the US, I would think, but diasporically, especially if you are a descendant of enslaved Africans on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. We're not supposed to cry. We're not supposed to do anything. We're supposed to just keep going. And that is disabling in and of itself. Every time you push past your point of exhaustion, you are harming yourself. You are disabling yourself. You are stressing out your endocrine system. Diabetes is not just about sugar, it's about stress. High blood pressure it runs in families, but they don't say the families are all Black families because of what was done to Black people, right? And it's something we're not supposed to tell anybody that that's where it came from, because somehow that's shameful to admit that your ancestors were stolen and trafficked and abused. And so I can't speak for anyone who is not of Black American heritage, but I have a good sense through my connections to other people in the diaspora that this is something we have all suffered through because of colonialism. And that our disabilities, forget, holding us in sacred space and loving us and caring for us. Sometimes it's as simple as somebody's just getting out of your damn way because you have a cane and having enough sense to move out of your way. And no, we're not going to get it perfect, but advocacy and documentation help you to get it right at some point. And so my biggest challenges also have been documentation, and because I was too exhausted, right? Too sick, too whatever, to keep up the documentation. And it's been challenging, but again, I've been practicing self-forgiveness and I talk a lot about it with my therapist.
Thank you so much, everybody, just for this conversation. Do fear we probably should wrap up like very, very soon. So what I'm gonna ask is if other folks want to like learn more about you or have questions, how can they connect with you, see your work? And then Amira, if you wanna add 2 notes while I plug in your contact, feel free to do so. But feel free to jump in. Where can we find you? Where can we connect with you if I just wanna pick your brain? And then Amira, your last notes.
Guys, come to UCLA. I'm always there. I'm always like protesting. So if you're on campus, there is a good chance you will run into me. And I have my Instagram. It's at Marvel Myra. I'll just put in the chat. You guys can follow me. I follow everyone back. I have like a Medium blog. I'm going to post an article regarding the BAFTA situation soon because that has been a very exhausting discourse, especially within like campus. And yeah, my final notes is I was been thinking throughout this conversation about a friend of mine named Leslie Lee III, and he passed away of long COVID just a few months ago. He had a podcast. And when I think about interpersonal challenges, I think about, especially like in medical spaces, because I resonated so deeply with what Lene was talking about. But I think about the fact that there are several different layers of code switching. There's having that double consciousness, which is how you kind of try to conform to whiteness as a safety and self-protection mechanism when you're in white society, and then being able to be freely Black when you're a community. There's masking. Then on top of that, there's having to advocate for your medical needs when you're encountering skepticism regarding your disability, because you're subjected both to medical racism and then you're subjected also to ableism. And Leslie had to deal with all of these things at the same time. He had this podcast. I recommend you like listen to some of his podcasts because they were excellent. And he was such a wonderful friend. We were nerds. We were such nerds. Oh my goodness. But advocacy, just again, existence is resistance. Every little thing you do to advocate for yourself, even if it feels like you're taking up too much space, no, that's you being resisting. That is you being like a radical force for change, for disability justice. All of us are practicing disability justice every day. And every interpersonal interaction is an opportunity to practice and perpetuate disability justice. So I think that's something that we should all hold close and be proud of ourselves for, because it isn't easy, and it isn't easy to have all of these intersecting identities that people sometimes don't want to acknowledge intersect. So yeah, everyone should give themselves a pat on the back for just being, because I wish I had done that when I was an undergrad.
Thank you so much, especially for sharing about your grief. Gonna pass it on to the rest of the panelists to tell us where we can find you or connect with you.
You'll see me on campus. If you see me, come say hi. I'll be the only Black blind man with the black guide dog. I love it. And at the end of the day, I have an older dog. He'll actually be retiring next year. But come over and say hi. Also, my email is dcoats@berkeley.edu. That's already made available. But I look forward to meeting anyone on campus. And thank you for the invitation to participate.
Thank you. Thank everybody. Everyone who's attended, everyone who's in person, everyone who's on Zoom. I want to thank all of the folks who helped me to grow up and be who I am right now, like Stacey Park, Tino Abayomi, Paul, Shafika Hudson, like all the disabled people we've lost, especially to long COVID in the last 5-6 years. I'm on the internet. My website is sayheylene.com. There's a contact form. There's also some grief resources. I did drop that information in the chat. And my Instagram is Dope Girl Fresh. I'll be coordinating some grief-focused activities for April and May for this year. And if anybody wants me on a panel, hit me up.
I've put my email address and my X, which I still do. Yes. Hang out. All the disabled kids are over there. Many of us. So you can reach me there as well. And I just want to say thank you so much for an extraordinary panel. It's really an honor to be in conversation with you, and to Chinyce for all of your hard work and your thoughtful questions. Congratulations on a job well done.
Thank you so much to our panelists and to everybody's participation, to the audience question from the Zoom. So we're going to take a 10-minute break and start at 3:15 out of respect for the folks on panel 2. The 10-minute break is short, but this is recorded, so if you do miss the intro to the second panel, it will be there. Also, if you RSVP, there's more information about each panelist on the document, so you can find information there. And that is all. Thank everybody.